Welcome to the Connected Ministry series. My name is Brad Hill. I'll be your host today. And the series is brought to you by Gloo. Gloo is the trusted platform that helps release the collective might of your church, your organization, or really ministry leaders just like you. So thanks so much for tuning in today. We're excited about the discussion that's about to happen. By the way, if your church is looking for more ways to connect to people in your community, the Gloo Explorer Connection program can help. You can learn all you need to know about it. Just go to Gloo, that's Gloo, gloo.us/reach to learn more. And every once in a while here in this Connected Ministry series, we sort of come across a topic that we want to explore over a number of episodes, sort of a mini series, if you will. And today we're kicking off a 3-part mini series called the NXT GEN Moment. So we're excited to welcome our first guest today in what's going to be, I think, a really exciting conversation. The NXT GEN is something that church leaders are thinking a lot about, comes up all the time when I talk to pastors, and we're hearing all these stats. We're hearing research about Gen Z. We're hearing what they're thinking about and what they're worried about, and there's misconceptions. And, you know, we're so thankful anytime we can get thought leaders in that understand, have journeyed with some of these younger leaders or future leaders and can really help all of us think well about how we can engage them. How can we create leadership pipelines and really elevate opportunities for people in these younger generations who, one day are going to shape the future and really be holding the leadership mantle of the church. So we're going to unpack all these kind of series. We're going to talk about generosity. We're going to talk about a number of things. And today, for our first part, I'm joined by Grant Skeldon. Grant is a friend. He's a longtime partner with Gloo, so we're excited to have him. But Grant said his mission is to unite and accelerate a diverse, dynamic group of young leaders to reach the most lost generation our nation has ever seen. I want to unpack that one in a minute. But we wanted to kick this off with Grant just because of his passion, his leadership, and his vision that he's got for the next generation. And we also partnered with him to release a course on Gloo called the NXT GEN Moment, and it's available now. So we'll give you more details at the end of this on where you can click over and go see that. But this course, you're going to want to check it out. It breaks down 6 easy ways to reframe your mindset around the next generation. So if you're looking to watch that, you can do so for free right here on Gloo. But for now, Grant, welcome in. So glad you could join us for the series.
Yeah, thanks, Brad.
So, Grant, first off, I think a vocabulary lesson is maybe in order from you to us. What is a next gen leader? Like, am I even using the right terminology? Like, just help us understand what it is and why you're so passionate on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm usually looking for, Brad, are you into Marvel comics or anything like that?
A little bit, yes. And
Okay.
I've got a whole range of kids and relatives who are too.
There's a X-Men, of course, has their mutants, and there's the guy in the wheelchair. Are you familiar with that guy? His name's Charles Xavier, or Professor X. For whatever reason, God, probably around 24 years old, I got put in this place where I actually got to take unique, influential young leaders to Israel, and it was a completely paid for trip. I look back on that moment, I'm like, what were y'all thinking, letting a 24-year-old like host these, nominate the leaders for it? It was such a big budget thing, a big vision, but they're at the beginning, and I guess they just saw something that I didn't even see in myself, but it really let me have the opportunity to look for who are the young leaders out there. It kind of reminded me kind of that verse that God's eyes always looking to and fro for those whose hearts are fully invested in Him. And I really started looking, who's God using, who has a sincere heart for the Lord, but especially like who is God using outside of the church. I will say that caveat is I'm often looking for, in a world where so few young people go to church, I think it's really important to train up pastors, but also train up Christian missionaries in culture. And so it was like speakers, authors, musicians, missionaries, nonprofit leaders, Olympic athletes, actors, anyone who loves Jesus in their 20s or 30s, that God had given significant influence, platform, voice, responsibility. We started doing trips to Israel, which turned to retreats through Think. And now we're doing our first summit in November. And yeah, that was kind of the group, and they honestly became some of my closest friends. But I just realized how much, as you I'm sure heard the saying, leadership is lonely. I found that was pretty common for a lot of these guys. I think if leadership was lonely for people, leaders all across the nation in the last couple decades, I think leadership is really lonely for young Christian leaders because most of their friends have left the church. The few that are left are still trying to figure out their calling in a lot of ways. But these guys, by the grace of God, kind of have stumbled into their gifting and found a lot of favor and acceleration in that. And so it can be hard when your life changes all of a sudden. For example, just to get a picture from a big picture to a one person, I just last week I met Zach, who was the guy who was preached the morning of the Asbury revival, and he led it for the next couple of weeks with many others that came behind him. But he was the one really at the beginning of that, and he just said, "Man, my life is so changed." In fact, my friends have even said, I wish we could have the old Zach back because you're kind of he's traveling." He said to another country every month. He said he's traveling all the time to speak, but like there's nations that want to hear what God did in Asbury, and his life is kind of turned upside down. And that's the common story for a lot of these young leaders is maybe they're traveling a lot, they're speaking, they're writing books, so they're having to work with publishers. They're often the youngest in the room. They are navigating leading or fundraising. It's all these different challenges. So what I love is they have a lot of momentum, a lot of potential, and our hope is to like pour mentorship and discipleship into them so they can steward that well.
So, I mean, a couple of things I love what you just said. Actually, also, I didn't hear you say a lot of labels like millennial, Gen Z. I heard really you kind of espousing, Grant, almost this curiosity, like this intentionality of looking for who that next leader, who is that candidate. And that feels like almost a level of curiosity that transcends generational labels. Like we as leaders should always be looking for that pipeline of who's coming next.
Yeah, I agree. And Carrie Newhoff, a mutual friend of ours, and done so much with you guys at Glue. He's probably the first person who I saw who was such a well-known leader who really personified that. I remember driving, we spoke at an event, and we both had flights around the same time. And he's like, "Hey, do you just want to ride with me?" And so this was a handful of years ago, and I'm thinking, I'm about to ride with one of the biggest leaders with the biggest podcast around leadership. There's no way I'm not about to ask this man questions. And for the 30-minute to 40-minute drive, I don't think I got a question in because he asked me questions the whole time. And I'm thinking, like, I'm so surprised you're asking me questions. Like, and I told him, "Hey, we're almost to the airport. I really want to ask you questions, and you haven't like let me ask." And he just was so curious about the next gen perspective. And I think it's really important to for older leaders and younger leaders to know, like, of course, Carrie has so much more wisdom than I do, but I've heard it labeled humble and intellectual. I think it's intellectual humility. I would say that's what he had a lot is like he's definitely smarter, wiser. He has experience. He's seen things that I've seen, and he knows things not just from reading a book, but from experience. But I think what he at least valued a lot is there is perspective that a younger generation has on things we know, but next gen could have a unique perspective. I mean, another quick story is I think Craig Rochelle, ironically, another one of the largest leadership podcasts there is. We hosted a gathering where Think and us got some of the top young adult pastors across the nation together, and he came and poured into us. And honestly, Brad, the first we had an hour with him, and I said, "Can we just do Q&A with you? Like, I'd love to do that." And he said, "Yeah, yeah." But by the time he went up, he said, "Honestly, I was asked to do Q&A, but I actually want to flip it. I want to do Q&A with you guys. Can I just ask you guys questions?" And he just asked us questions, and I think there's a way that those guys win over young people and young leaders when they haven't lost that intellectual humility, and it's huge. I think a lot of these young guys would run through walls. I would for Kerry because of the way he led. So I think it's really important. And as someone who's now aging out, I'm not the next generation. I'm a big brother to the next generation. I think it's really important to find those young leaders and make sure they get further faster.
I love that. Yeah, intellectual humility. And there's an element there where, yeah, it builds a connection, but maybe in the opposite direction than you would have thought. Like getting in the car with Kerry, you were all teed up to try to connect with him, and instead
For
he's
sure.
yeah. And that's this whole series that we're doing is called Connected Ministry, And one of the reasons why we landed on that name is really we observe across many domains, not just next gen leadership, a sense of disconnection. And there's a lot happening in the church right now that we can point to and say, man, if we were more connected, likely a lot of these same challenges would be different or wouldn't be there. Um, you know, don't have to tell you at all about mental health epidemics that we see, and so often here at Glue when we connect people in with certain felt needs or certain life journeys they're on, the church or the person on the receiving end of that may or may not feel really equipped to connect with that person. And then in millennials and Gen Z, we see almost the most disconnection of any generation in terms
Hmm.
of isolation, loneliness. What are you seeing contribute to that level of disconnection? Um, Partly the question is more cultural, I guess, but I want you to really maybe zone in on ministry too. Like, where are we seeing disconnection as it relates to the church and ministry to this generation?
Yeah, two things come to mind. One is we have to build a culture of honor among young people. To my generation, I'm preaching this Sunday at a church plant called Way Church in Nashville. I'm helping my good friend, who's one of those young leaders. He was at the very first retreat I ever did, named Noah Heron, but he has me preaching on discipleship, and it's like many church plants, mostly young people. And so I'm just going to preach more to them like, hey, if we want to get mentored and discipled, then we have to have a culture of honor. Like, anyone who's older that comes in here, and sometimes I jokingly say, because no one likes being called older, I say chronologically superior, that we are going to like honor them and sincerely, not for show. Like, we need to be humble enough to know we're not going to be like Lord of the Flies, where all the young kids just make the rules and it ends badly. We're not going to be like seventh graders asking other seventh graders for dating advice. We need healthy marriages or strong marriages. People, that's who I want to ask for advice. And so when older people come here, they've got to come into, because I think strategy is important. We've all heard this quote around, I think it's Drucker who said culture eats strategy for breakfast. Is there's got to be a culture of honor. And also on the other side, there's got to be from the older generation a culture of believing and loving the next generation, expecting the best. I do think there's a couple of things that hurt and divide is when it comes to the older generation. I one of I think your posture of expectation matters. You know that phrase "non-anxious presence" has come up a lot in the last couple of years, and I would say to the older church, there is not a non-anxious presence from the older generation towards the future of the church. There is often this doom and gloom and worried and man, I wouldn't want to lead in this time. I wouldn't want my kids to grow up in this time. Even sometimes it gets so politically divided, racially divided, so much tension. The culture is so far from what the things of God that will be. I'll hear a lot of Christians say things, which good intentions I want to say, but they'll say like, I just hope Jesus comes back now. And to me, as someone who has a lot of young friends that don't know the Lord, and a lot of a generation that I believe, like I said, is one of the most lost generations our nation has ever seen. I hope God tarries, like it says in Peter. Like I hope He waits. I hope that there's more that come to know Him, like He says in the Bible. So I would ask that instead of having this doom and gloom, which has some warrant, I don't want to say there's not signs of difficulty, but I would say, I liken it to we got to choose what kind of friends we're going to be to the next generation. And when it comes to the friends of that paralyzed man who was lowered through a roof, he had some friends who really believed and had expectation despite sign after sign of his paralyzed state. And I would say, if we could have more older people that are like, I'm looking in the eye and I'm not going to ignore it, that this is unique times you guys are growing up in, but I have the audacity and faith and expectation to break through a roof and still expect God's going to show up. He's going to do major big things. It could only take a second for the Holy Spirit to turn everything around. And I promise you, like Bob Goff has a little bit of that state of mind. And you would notice Bob Goff's this older man who's got a ton, thousands, millions of young people that just absolutely love the guy. And I don't think he's working hard to win over the next generation. I just think he's an expectant, hopeful, joyful, young, older man. And young people love and would love to see more of that. And so that tension of what do you expect from the future of the church? Do you believe Jesus is going to do some new things, or are you just worried about what the news is saying? Because the Bible can say something a lot different. Um, and then, yeah, just relationally, I would say also it's really important for us to be intentional with building relationships because younger people are so much better when they're around older people regularly. I think if the enemy can't defeat us, then he will try to divide us. Like he can't
Hmm.
defeat the church, but I do think he very seriously tries to divide it as much as he can.
I want to ask you about two things, kind of myths and risks. First,
Yeah.
myths. Are are there, or maybe is there a myth that you would say some of those chronologically superior leaders would have about younger generations that you just see over and over, like not bearing itself out?
I think one of the biggest myths, which I think they both ironically are a little bit intimidated by each other. So it's not a spiritual thing, it's not a selfish thing. I think it's there's an intimidation. There's even maybe, let's say, an insecurity on both ends. I found from younger people, it's, hey, would this person really want to pour into me? Does this person even want to be around young people? Am I worthy of being poured into? And I think vice versa on the other side. Am I worthy to be a disciple to this person? Is my life glorious enough to be followed? Am I a good enough speaker, leader? Do I have anything to show if they were to come into my life and see and follow me like they did with Jesus? Would they be impressed or encouraged, or is there anything there? And I think the enemy's lie is like, are you worthy? Are you worthy to be discipled? Are you worthy to be followed? And yeah, it's just I don't think that's the right question. I don't think young people are looking for perfect people. Even Paul himself, which was, I mean, a powerhouse disciple maker and leader in the church, he didn't say follow me. He said follow me as I follow Christ. And so I don't think the weight is on us being perfect. I think you'd be surprised how many young people I know that are really encouraged when their discipler will show weakness and show areas they're still being sanctified and still even. I mean, I think of example of I would sometimes meet mothers or and wives that young girls were asking, "Hey, can you disciple me? Can I like come into your home even and be around you if you're too busy?" Because sometimes one of the biggest myths is you don't have time. I'll get into that in a second, but I started seeing them be like, Grant, honestly, I want to pour into some young girls, but my house is a mess. My kids are crazy. Things are just chaos sometimes. And the only difference between those moms that felt like I don't want them in because it's like they're not going to like this, and the moms that did disciple young women and let them in the house wasn't that they had better homes. It was just that they were willing to let the young people see that this is what being a mother looks like, and this is what kids are like sometimes. And sometimes, I mean, you're cleaning the house, and then the kids just come up and like it's crazy. But it was. I can tell you, like, so many of those young girls are like, man, I love going. She's so real and raw, and I feel like I have a better picture of what life looks like in marriage as with a full-time job with three kids. And I think Hollywood's not showing the best picture, and it gives a faint, small, even unrealistic picture. And discipleship could give a better idea of, hey, this is the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful of marriage, of ministry, of leadership. And so there's a lot of great things there. And then the second, the time thing, that's probably the biggest myth is you don't have time to disciple someone. And I would say you don't have time to mentor someone, which would be come and meet with me. I would differentiate mentorship and discipleship to being mentorship is like if you wanted to add something to your calendar, you wanted to set the time weekly, monthly to meet with someone. But discipleship isn't come and meet with me, it's come and follow me. And so I think that's different. If you don't have time to meet with someone else, then you might have time to include someone else in your life. And so it's not adding something to your calendar, it's including someone in your calendar. And I think it's just getting creative and creating a culture of I invite people into my world. Sometimes, if they are hungry, they're humble, they're teachable, they're faithful, then there's always someone young, I think, in everyone's life that is willing to move their schedule around the older person's schedule. Because young people have time, especially when you're young and single. I always tell young singles, that's the one window. You don't have to ask your parents for permission. You don't have to ask your spouse for permission. My wife, of course, works with you guys at Gloo. But once I got married, I can't spend over $100 without talking to her. I can't. I just made plans for tonight. I had to run it by her first. we're saying, hey, are you cool if I go to this? I used to just go to things. I used to just say yes. And so I tell young singles, like, savor this time. Don't let the enemy lie to you and say, just get married, just move. Oh, you're missing out. Just move fast, just or sleep around. Like, no, focus on mission because this is the time to go get discipled. You have time. Once you're married, you have kids, you have a full-time job, you got a full-time, you got parents, as with all these kids, you don't have a lot of free time, but you do have wisdom. And so I think it's important to know you don't have to add something to your schedule. You can include someone in your schedule, but you got to be vulnerable enough to know that it's not all on you. It's just follow me as I follow Christ. I even sometimes say, follow me as I stumble towards Christ, because sometimes I'll be leading and sometimes I might be stumbling, but the Holy Spirit will not allow me to just stay here. We will get closer to Him.
Wow, thanks for those comments. I think that's very freeing to a lot of leaders listening. And yeah, just it, you set the bar where folks can probably feel like, yeah, it's okay to let them into the mess a little bit. It's okay to have them follow. I don't have to have it all cleaned up and have a clean calendar.
Yeah.
That's
If I
great.
can comment real quick too on that, Brad, is
Yeah.
just because I think, yeah, I just think a lot of people just, I've had so many older people say, I don't know if anyone would want to follow me. And I hate that that is holding people back. And I try to define discipleship in my way is frequently following someone who is spiritually a couple steps ahead of you. And so when I have someone say, I don't know if my life is this, or I don't know if they'd want to, or what could I really teach them at the end of the day, I usually say, because they think they need to be this big time leader. That's the big myth is Christians think the Great Commission was for like senior pastors, CEOs, those who are like running nonprofits, the leaders on stage. And that's why so few disciple. It's why I want to normalize discipleship. And I think frequently following someone who is spiritually a couple steps ahead, what I'll ask instead is, not, do you think you have a lot to teach them? I'll just ask them, do you think you're spiritually a couple steps ahead of them? And most of the time they'll be like, well, yeah, definitely. I'm like, that's a great start. That again, follow me as I follow Christ. I'm just a little bit more ahead of you, so follow me. But I'm also following Him, and so I think that puts a lot of the weight off and more the focus on Jesus as the perfect person.
So the other category I was curious about, Grant, maybe gets a little bit more into the church leader thinking about how he or she may bring a younger generation into leadership.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking about Kara Powell, who's also one of our guests in this mini series, and
Great.
some earlier work that she did at Fuller Youth. One of the dynamics she cited, I think she and others have called keychain leadership. And it's sort of like, when's that moment that you could hand some keys to a younger leader, which is sort of a metaphor for trust, and I've heard you talk
Yeah.
about this as well. But the fear behind that is in that older leader, it's like, what if it doesn't go well? What if they mess up?
Yeah.
What if they blow the place up? How do you think about like the appropriate amount of risk I take handing keys to a younger leader?
Yeah. I don't know if I have the full answer on that. I will say I subscribe to heavy responsibility, and I think Jesus did. Man, he put a lot of, he hinged a lot on some young people. And I actually always want to give credit to Saul because I don't think he gets much credit in the Bible for doing some good. I mean, he's mostly known for the bad part with David, instead of the good part that he started with David. But I think a lot of young people don't go to church, not because they're getting asked to do too much, but because they're getting asked to do way too little. And so the church doesn't change if they do show up or don't show up. It does not depend on them. And so I think when you start having it where it's like, hey, I gotta be there. This thing, not only are they counting on me, I started this initiative. Of course I'm gonna be there. My neck's on the line for it. There's gotta be some of that. And if there's not, then why the world's giving those kind of responsibilities. The world is kind of like, come on, come do this, come change the world, come start this cause, come march with us, come whatever it is, start a side hustle. Even if it's not a cause, it's a business or a product. It's one of the most entrepreneurial generations we've seen in a long time. And so the world's got the message of urgency, responsibility, step up. And the church is sometimes like, yeah, I want you to be this eventually, but I'm worried if it might fail. And I think of Saul with David is like, hey, what if David failed? it wasn't just going to be on David, it was going to be an entire nation of Israel. He hinged on a young person, and even go further, it's not even a warrior. It's not like one of his soldiers that was there after 40 days was fed up. It was a kid who showed up to bring bread and cheese to his brothers who actually were warriors. There's a story of a lot of rejection in David's life. His own father didn't even think he could have got picked, his own dad. And then his brothers seemed to be upset that he was even there. He's like, "What are you even doing here?" So his brothers, his dad, and then Saul gets him. And the only way Saul should have known this guy was from playing music for him. I got to give it to Saul. It's like he must have seen the hand of God on this kid's confidence or something. But still, even is that enough to say, okay, I'm going to let you fight? And then we got a generation, sometimes older generation. It's like, all right, we want the next generation. But what they really want is they want the next generation to show up and shut up and just come and show up to what we do. And not change anything. But we know from these conversations around racial diversity, from next gen, it's very similar. It's like if you want this, the presence of those that are different and those that are other, then it's going to come with change. It can't just be show up and sit down. It's be a part of the decision making, be at the table, like create, hopefully, what's something that's better together. And I give a lot of the credit to Saul also for getting this kid saying, okay, I'm going to gamble on you, kid. And then the kid saying, wait, I gotta wear armor and a sword? And he's like, yes, of course you do. And he's like, no, I want to do it a different way. He's like, even me, as I'm getting old, I'm like, man, that took a lot of courage to be like, do you know how big the stakes are, David, right now? Like, you want to try this method? You have, I actually, I take him taking this back. And he actually kept going and allowing him. Again, I don't know if God prompted him or something, but he gave huge responsibility. And I just want to encourage, I mean, I personally believe, this is conjecture, but I personally believe it's one of the biggest reasons why David never forsake Saul is because he was one of the first older people to finally gamble on him and believe in him. And then to everything kind of changed after that. David, outside of even Christians in the church, David and Goliath's story is probably, outside of Jesus, one of the biggest stories that everyone knows. Even it's a phrase, it's an idea of David and Goliath's story. And it's because Saul gave him a chance and believed in him and hinged, I wouldn't just say a little on him, I'd say everything on him in a lot of ways. And there is something there. I think, Brad, I'm sure you have someone like this. I'm finding in almost every high capacity national young leader, they have a couple people like that who saw something in them, believed in them, and then hinged a lot on them, put their neck on the line for this young person. And so again, I would run through a wall for the people that did that for me. And I think if we normalize that, we'll start seeing a lot more high capacity young leaders.
Yeah, that's super honoring. And what a way, by the way, to leave a legacy, right? To pour into that young leader. I love how you just kind of shone a good light on Saul. A lot of times he gets a bad rap. Didn't go always that great toward the latter years for him, but
Yeah, unfortunately.
um,
But I mean, gosh, I mean, I always think, what if Saul was secure? He trusted God in that moment, and if he
yeah,
could have just been secure, I think he could have walked with David, and who knows what else could have not happened. I don't think Bathsheba could have happened. Uriah didn't have to die. Man, Jonathan would have been his friend. They were at battle in different battles because of that division generationally. Like David was fighting on a different battlefield than Saul and Jonathan. David didn't have his best friend in Jonathan. There's so many things that were impacted because of an older man's insecurity towards the next generation. Like it impacted way more than Saul. It impacted his son. It impacted his own life and Israel. And it's so sad when we can't like be excited for when the next generation thrives, because there is that potential that maybe that means that opportunity is going to thrust that new young leader in a big way. But I think, I mean, at the end of the day, we're casting our crowns before Jesus. It doesn't matter which generation does more. It just matters how much we get people to know the Lord and love him and receive his love.
very honoring. Yeah, that's great. Okay, a couple more quick thoughts before we wrap. Um, we used this phrase earlier. Is it really the most spiritually open generation? Talk about that.
Yeah, I think they're just open because it's like the most mentorless generation. It's I think the major institutions and strong I don't want to say strongholds, the major anchors of direction in life, from colleges to churches, um, even like the generation doesn't really read as much. They're more podcasting. They're kind of getting maybe a more horizontal wisdom than like vertical, like ancient wisdom. And so I could see where it's like, yeah, I'm open to almost anything because these things that we used to get direction from scripture, the Bible. College is helping us in direction. We don't. I think it is open. I would say I've found definitely spiritually open. It's always hard once you get to truth. I just had a friend. I'm starting a podcast with Will Chung, and he just said this, where he said the next generation is basically so open to diversity. They love the idea of diversity, but there's only one type of diversity they don't like, and it's the diversity of thought. He said if it's racial diversity, they love it. If it's gender diversity, they love it. If it's cultural diversity, global and national diversity, just all of that. But once you get to the diversity of ideas, there's certain ideas like no, absolutely not. And I think that it's a hard one when it's like I'm open to a lot of things, but not this. And that's where the challenge is going to be with the Word of God. However, I do think the young people I know that are just saying, you know what, I'm not going to be ashamed of the scriptures. I'm not going to be ashamed of saying that Jesus is the way, are winning better than the ones that are trying to again, not be bold and mean. That's never going to be and never was the right way, but living somewhere in between compassion and conviction, I would say.
So I want to ask you in a minute about the course that you just recorded, the Next Gen Moment. But first, we've been doing this thing with each of our guests. Again, it's the Connected Ministry series. So I wanted to ask you about that word connection, a little bit like circle back to where we started, and really just invite you to dream or share vision, Grant, for a minute of if the church was connected, when the church is better connected, what does that look like to you? And permission to answer any way you want, but what does a connected church mean to you?
I'd say one of the biggest reasons I want young people to be connected with older people, and you kind of pointed to something I think is the byproduct of not having this connection, is I want the young people to not just receive wisdom from the next generation or even responsibilities, but I would say especially like prophetic direction from the older generation. I know prophetic is kind of a scary word depending on the denomination, but in First Timothy 4:12, that is the go-to verse for young people often. It's the classic young people verse when it says the don't let anyone look down on you because you are young. But it actually goes on, it's actually a comma, and then says, but set the believers an example in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. And the first time I ever preached, Brad, was on that verse. The first time I ever spoke at a conference on the next generation, it was a 2-day notice. I think they did a panel on the next generation and realized no one in the next generation was on the next generation panel, which is a very common thing actually, where it's like these guys care about the next gen, they influence the next gen, but they are not the next gen. And I personally think that's like doing a panel around what women want and need and what they're looking for in church, but only men lead that panel. And I'm not saying they can't give great stats. They can give amazing stats, and we can do great stats on women, great stats on next gen. But I think they realize, and so I'm coming in with a little bit of a heart of, oh my gosh, like they don't even have young people, and I'm kind of a pity invite. I'm going to defend the next generation because at that time, participation trophies and skinny jeans, everyone was kind of dissing on them. So I felt like I needed to defend next gen. So I go to this verse, and one, God convicted me, don't go with that tone. Like, this is the worst tone and posture ever. Tell great stories of how older people have impacted you, not the older people that have fallen short. But then two, as I went down that text, don't let anyone look down at you because you're young. Set the believers an example in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. It actually just 2 verses down says, and do not neglect the gift you have, which so many young people are looking for their gift, their calling, the thing they're going to contribute to make a mark on the world. And it says, do not neglect the gift you have, which was given to you by the prophecy and the counsel of elders. And once I saw that verse, I've really shifted more of a mission towards helping the next generation to connecting generations, because I saw that as not the next gen text in the Bible, but then multi-generational text of the Bible and how we are supposed to be connected as generations. And I saw a generation I knew that is so dying to find their cause in their gift and, again, how they're going to change the world. This generation jumps on causes, from Coney 2012 to the Ice Bucket Challenge to an X on their hand to whatever. Like, it's passionate. There's no lack of passion. There is a lot of lack of direction, and consistency. And I think the older generation, I don't think we even realize how much of a role biblically that they can play into, like in Timothy's case, laying on hands, seeing something in them, even prophetically telling them that, and maybe even praying over them in that. I know, again, going back to a lot of high capacity young leaders I know, even I would say a lot of, I've started asking older leaders that are like the big names that we know that are on stages, they are speaking, they're writing, they're the voices that are guiding the church in a lot of ways. I've started asking them, who was the first person that saw something in you, verbalized it in you, and like guided you and even prayed over you? And a lot of them have it. A lot of them have many stories like that. It's almost like the more they have, the more effective and impactful they have. And what's crazy is in a world of saturated content, like many of us today couldn't even remember what was preached about 4 weeks ago in our church. Like our retention rate is not the best with a very saturated world, but these unforgettable moments they still had of someone, often not even someone they knew well, who saw something in them, communicated that. I would say prophetically showed it and told them and encouraged them in that gifting. It's a very, very powerful thing. It doesn't cost any money. It doesn't take a lot of time. And I think if that act of connection could happen more, it affirmed a gifting that they would later could say, hey, if you could have only seen me, if you could only see where I am now. I have someone like that, first person to see me speak. I was 16, 6 months saved. And to even be doing this now, that person saw me. It was a terrible message. It's on YouTube. Actually, I'm so glad it's buried in YouTube. No one's going to find it. But it's me at 16 talking about the next generation and at a Bible study of 20 people. And some older man I've never seen since saw something in me. And so I just want those moments more, because if a generation is dying to find their gifting, but they're just searching in their own wisdom and their own strength, I think it leads to a lot of disappointment. It's not guided by wisdom, so it's inconsistent. It's not permanent. I think it's leading to a lot of anxiety. I got to find my thing. Oh, that's not working. I think it's leading to a lot of job hopping. I think it's leading to a lot of depression, and I think that could eventually lead to suicide. Where all these systems where I'm not finding it through college, I thought I would, and they're looking for guidance in what their calling is, and they don't have the wisdom of the older people in their life, and I don't think they even know they need it. But biblically, there's precedence for that. Last thing I'll even say is Paul would have mentioned it again when he talks about Timothy's grandmother who fanned into flame his gift through the prophecy. And so there's something there of young people identifying and finding their gift through older people. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. You can't find it without it. But I do think it really, really helps when older people can show it, identify and speak that over them and pray over them. And I hope that becomes a more normal act in the church of connection.
Yeah, well said. I agree. You have that person. I have multiple folks, yeah, in my journey. And I love how you kind of tied it to those leaders who had someone pour into them are now pouring into then the next. So,
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, this is, who is the next gen today is one day going to be a leader, and you're patterning and modeling for them how to pour into the next gen.
Yeah.
Hopefully, this is a chain that's a healthy one that we can start. Well, that's amazing. Grant, we could talk all day. Tell us real quick about the Next Gen Moment course, because if leaders love this and want to direct maybe what can I do next, I think you can go check out this course. What are they going to find over there?
Yeah, I mean, I think what was important about that is in a world where we study so much about why young people leave the church, too few times do we study why people stay. I think Kara, who's also another speaker, sounds like she's done some research around what are the things that keep people in church, and I know others have as well. But I think that I tried to go a little bit even exploring a new route as well of like not even why they leave or why they stay, but like what are the traits, what are the turning points, what are the consistencies, and young people that don't leave but actually decide to lead on behalf of the church. And there are some common things. We've talked about some of them here. From they had a mentor and disciple maker, they had someone see something in them at a young age, they had someone give them big responsibilities at a young age. But really spell that out, hear stories from others, where it's like, oh wow, this is consistent. Like there's something there, and I think it inspire you to see the power of it from young people's mouths. And I think it will also give a lot of direction of what that could look like. Because there's one way for ministry leaders, different for a marketplace leader to someone who's a creative, to someone who's go into education, and we get different stories and perspectives on it. But I left really encouraged, seeing like, man, if we could just normalize these things, we could see a lot more high capacity young leaders, where it's kind of what we're marked by as Christians, is we are the people that develop mature, godly, Christ loving, city changing, church investing young people.
Well, that sounds good. Yeah, that sounds like what probably a lot of our leaders are after. So thank you for today, but also Grant, thank you for sharing all your wisdom in this course that I think is going to help a lot of leaders and a lot of churches really understand this better. So really
Yeah,
appreciate you lending your time and wisdom for us.
absolutely.
Y-
Thanks, Brad.
yeah, absolutely. So, for those of you watching, you can, number one, learn more about Grant and the work he's doing. You can go check him out at grantskeldon.com. And also, that summit that you mentioned, Grant, coming up this fall, that's available too. It's Next Gen Summit. It's NXT GEN Summit.com. So, would invite folks to check out both those websites. Also, for those of you interested in the Next Gen Moment course, the great news is it's available right here on Gloo. So you're already in, you've done everything you need to do. It's available in the Connected Ministry Hub. So that's available to you right here in this environment. We definitely encourage you to check out all 6 lessons in there and maybe share that with your team. And as we wrap up, thank you for joining us on this latest episode of the Connected Ministry series. In part 2 of the Next Gen Moment mini-series, we kind of referenced it, but we're excited to welcome our next guest, Kara Powell. She's the executive director at the Fuller Youth Institute. She's also working on an exciting project called 10 by 10. So we're going to ask her specifically more about how to develop next gen leaders. You'll want to check out that episode, and we will see you next time. Thanks again.